Nashville Public Radio serves Middle Tennessee in many ways every day, including through this podcast. You can support it by leaving a review or rating, by telling a friend about it, or by contributing at WPLN.org/give.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's November 5th, 2025. On this day in 1966, a song hit number one on the Billboard chart that had nothing to do with Tennessee. But it seemed like maybe it did, in a way that reinforced many people's interpretation of what the lyrics were really about. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News.
Take the last train to Clarksville and I'll meet you at the station. You can be here by 4:30 because I've made your reservation. Don't be slow.
The Last Train to Clarksville was written for the made-for-TV band, the Monkees, very early in the development of that show. In fact, it was recorded in the same session as the theme song, Hey, Hey, We're the Monkees. And if all of that sounded like unfamiliar word salad, then you should know that the Monkees were designed to be a blatant Beatles ripoff back in the early days of the Beatles, when they all still wore matching suits to perform songs like I Want to Hold Your Hand and starred in comic movies like Hard Day's Night. The Monkees were made up of 4 young guys who were cast as actors with musical talent to star in a show about a band. They didn't meet organically, didn't function as an artistic team when it came to the music, weren't even allowed to play their instruments for real, at least not at the start. When the pitch for the show got a network green light, songwriters Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart were brought in to work on an initial batch of songs for the band. Since it was a Beatles knockoff, they looked directly to Beatles songs for inspiration.
Paperback writer.
And listening to a new single, Paperback Writer, a misheard lyric gave them the idea of a chorus about taking the last train somewhere. The sound of Paperback Writer inspired a new guitar riff. And from there, Last Train to Clarksville came together really quickly. Now, the thing about writing songs for a brand new TV comedy meant to be bubblegum entertainment for a young audience was that the songs needed to be kind of vague. That was necessary for practical purposes, because who knew what kind of storyline would be going on when they sang the song of the show? The lyrics couldn't risk changing the tone of things too much. Plus, the network had to approve, and networks could get pretty antsy about youth culture in the 60s. The lyrics of Last Train to Clarksville really are quite vague. The singer is telling someone that he's made them a train reservation to meet him at a certain station so they can get together one more time before something. But the thing that is happening before is never stated. There are brief hints that their relationship is romantic, like a mention of coffee-flavored kisses. And then, at 2 points, the singer also says, "And I don't know if I'm ever coming home." That's it. But look, it was 1966. The United States had started to really ramp up involvement in the Vietnam conflict the year prior. Tensions over that war were starting to boil over, especially among young people. So by the time the Monkees TV show debuted and the song was actually released, its intended audience had grown up a little more than the network may have realized. Plus, the song that Last Train was modeled on was a pre-release single for what turned out to be a watershed album for the Beatles, Revolver. Their shift to music that was more psychedelic and more revolutionary than what had come before. The writers for the Monkees didn't know what was on the way when they wrote their song, but Revolver came out shortly before the TV show debuted. So when the audience heard a song with Paperback Writer vibes to it, of course they were going to interpret it through a revolver-tinted lens. In other words, a lot of the kids figured out that they were hearing an anti-war song from the perspective of a soldier, even if the network had no clue. And some of those kids looked to one word for what they considered to be definitive proof. Look at what train station they were supposed to meet at, they'd say. The one in Clarksville, by which they meant Clarksville, Tennessee, right outside the gates of Fort Campbell. That was taken by some fans as confirmation that this wasn't actually a vague song at all, but a very specific one from the point of view of a member of the 101st Airborne. And for those who'd been following news from Vietnam, This would have made perfect sense. That summer, the 101st had played a major part in Operation Hawthorne, a brutal fight that was widely reported in the U.S. as a major victory. Footage from the battle was shown on the news. What would be more emblematic of what was happening in the nation at that moment than a song about someone from that particular division? Except that's way more specific than anything the songwriters actually had in mind. And that's a level of detail that wasn't even possible in their rush to write a whole album of music for a brand new made-up band. They didn't take the time to do any kind of research into where there were army bases and which train station a soldier might actually pick for a rendezvous with his girlfriend. This was a song they wrote in one sitting just a couple of days before it was recorded. It's all fairly off the cuff. From the story that they consistently told in interviews for decades afterwards, the writers didn't even know of a real town called Clarksville, much less Clarksville, Tennessee. They just wanted 2 syllables, and the vowel sounds needed to kind of sound right. They'd heard of a town in Arizona called Clarkdale, and they played around with that name, but didn't love that long A sound for that part of the chorus. So Ville was subbed out for Dale, and there you have it. However, as wrong as people may have been about the Clarksville reference, they weren't wrong about the song. As singer Mickey Dolenz now says plainly, it was a covert song about a soldier about to deploy, grabbing one last date with his girlfriend. It was just supposed to sound to those who figured things out as if it could have been any soldier, from any unit, anywhere in the country. In just a few minutes, this week's edition of What Wear Wednesday. That's coming up after the newscast.
Thematic Static on WNXP is the mixtape we make together, a themed set loosely organized by you, the listener, handpicking songs according to a theme. Airing first Thursdays at 9 a.m. and again Saturdays at 9 a.m., Thematic Static plucks your requests from the socials at WNXP Nashville and by voice memo at 615-320-9100. Thematic Static, the mixtape we make together, supported by United Record Pressing, only on WNXP.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. As part of a court order, President Donald Trump has authorized partial payments for SNAP recipients during the government shutdown. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee says he doesn't know when those payments will get to people in need, but the process will be made harder because the funding will have to go through another channel.
Now, if they just release the funding, the turnaround is pretty quick. But if they release partial funding, the complexity of loading cards with a different formula than before is going to be difficult.
Some relief will be coming to SNAP recipients through food banks. The governor has announced a $5 million influx of cash to state partners like Second Harvest Food Bank to feed families impacted by the government shutdown. However, that money is a fraction compared to the full amount that usually goes to Tennesseans through the federal SNAP program. The delay has been challenging for the 700,000 Tennesseans awaiting aid, but WPLN health reporter Catherine Sweeney tells us the ordeal is also putting a strain on local grocers.
The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program serves about 1 in 10 Tennesseans, but they're not spread out evenly. In struggling rural counties, it's closer to 1 in 5. Meanwhile, in urban areas, low-income neighborhoods tend to have too few grocery stores.
There are some stores in Tennessee that have 70% SNAP customers, and their business will definitely be affected.
That's Rob Eichard, president and CEO of the Tennessee Grocers and Convenience Store Association. He says their woes won't disappear when the shutdown ends.
We're starting to look ahead to what a sudden influx of past due benefits is going to do to store inventories. And it will put a strain on food supply chains all across the United States.
He says some of those downstream consequences could show up in Tennessee stores. Catherine Sweeney, WPLN News.
If you or your family need help buying food, or if you want to help, see our guide at WPLN.org. In the trade deal President Trump announced last week with China, one part especially matters to Tennessee farmers. That's because soybeans are a top cash crop in the state, and China is a top buyer. The Tennessean reports soybeans account for 1.75 million acres in the state this year, or more than 2,000 square miles. But in response to tariffs, China is not importing those soybeans this year. Now, U.S. officials say they'll cut some tariffs on China, which in turn will start buying millions of tons of soybeans before the end of the year. Still, an official deal has not yet been signed. Federal agriculture officials have pledged some $3 billion in aid to farmers to help offset the toll of the trade war, but that money has been on hold amid the government shutdown. Tennessee residents and environmental groups will rally against a pipeline near the Tennessee Valley Authority's headquarters in Knoxville today. Pipeline giant Enbridge recently began construction on a 120-mile pipeline across the state. WPLN's Caroline Eggers reports it will supply methane to TVA's future gas plant in Kingston. Tennessee's special congressional race may be more competitive than anticipated. Polling by Impact Research finds that if turnout is like the primary, Republican candidate Matt Van Epps could lead the race by 8 points. But if turnout trends closer to other recent special elections, where Democratic voters may be more motivated to show up, then Nashville lawmaker Afton Bain is within the margin of error. On the Republican side, voters are concerned about Van Epps' support for Medicaid and Social Security cuts and tax breaks for the rich. There's room for independent candidate John Thorpe to sway some Republican voters and possibly net 9% of the vote, according to polling. The election for District 7, which includes parts of Nashville as well as Dixon, Clarksville, and several other counties, will be December 2nd. Nashville International Airport is saying goodbye for now to Concourse A. This week, the airport shared that demolition has begun on that wing of the building, making way for a total overhaul. When it's complete, the new Concourse A will include larger restrooms, spaces for mothers and service animals, a mezzanine level for air lounges, plus an outdoor terrace. The improvements are part of a $3 billion plan to expand and modernize B&A. The airport authority says the concourse will reopen in July of 2028. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Now that Halloween is over, some folks are heading straight into Christmas season. But I, for one, am glad to know at least someone's giving Thanksgiving its due first. Monkees will tell you about it.
I'm Marquise Munson here with another edition of Nashville Public Radio's What We're Wednesday, keeping you up to date with the happenings in Nashville this week. Live music opportunities begin tonight with WNXP presents Purity Ring at Brooklyn Bowl and Sabrina Carpenter with Amber Mark and Olivia Dean at Bridgestone Arena. Also starting tonight, Briston Maroney presents Paradise with 3 nights at the Blue Room. Thursday night, legendary Paul McCartney at the Pinnacle, and on Friday night, Booker T. Jones is at Riverside Revival. Also on Friday, Viagra Boys performs at Marathon Music Works. Wrap up this week's listings Monday with Of Monsters and Men at the Pinnacle, and WNXP presents Wishy at Cannery Hall's Row 1 stage. For more events, head over to WNXP.org/events. We are officially in the holiday season, and this week for What We're Wednesday, we feature Alex Murphy Trio presents Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, happening at Rudy's Jazz Room. Although this event isn't until November 23rd and 26th, their previous Halloween show, The Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, sold out. Murphy will bring a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving by Vince Guaraldi to life in an evening of soulful, swinging jazz that captures the heart of this Peanuts classic. Murphy, who performs and teaches at the Nashville Jazz Workshop, describes Guaraldi's work and how it influenced him.
The music is really like this kind of hybrid of like jazz influence, but he's like applying a lot of the music he loves. He was a big Antonio Carlos Jobim fan, so you hear a lot of different Latin grooves being used in, specifically bossa nova, used in his writing. The beautiful thing about jazz has always been a music about what people are going through in life. It's not a terribly complicated plot. Like, we're not talking about Quentin Tarantino movie over here, right? We're talking about just a really good feeling, strong, single sentiment story. So he is just properly detailing the day-to-day life, right? And we see that in the Thanksgiving special and also the Christmas special. So Vince really provided kind of a framework on how to bring in different influences that could develop into a sort of vision that he had. And for me, when I see that, I'm like, man, okay, so I love certain kinds of, let's say, Oasis, or I love Sade, or I love hip hop, and I love all these things. So how can I bring those in? And for me, I can look at people like Vince like, oh man, he brought in all these influences that he loved to achieve making a great soundtrack or something legendary that people always remember. So for me, like, that's kind of the model. Like, can I bring in all of these things into my artistry and what I do as my career? And for me, Vince and what he did with all the Peanuts stuff, makes a lot of sense. And for me, it flexes that muscle. Can I put this show together that's the next evolution of this? Like, can I have Brian Brown come and do a 16 bar on one of these things, which I have done? Can I have Emmanuel Etcham play trumpet? And there wasn't a lot of trumpet on these records, but can I have him play something that's more driving? And, can I do any of those things? And the answer is yes. When I was in Chicago, I did this show, the Charlie Brown Christmas show, for 2 years. Pandemic happened, I moved down here, so I reached out to Rudy's about an idea to do the Charlie Brown Christmas show. And so they hadn't had anyone doing it for a few years, and so I kind of got into doing it. But one of the challenges with Charlie Brown Christmas is everybody knows the music so well. So how do you approach the music in a fresh way with the spirit of jazz and the, Black American music, experience? How do you approach that and not just do what people hear? Because, and I make this joke when I do the show, if I did the music top to bottom the way it is on the Apple Music or Spotify soundtrack, we would be there for 3 minutes and then you're done, right? So I got to make a 2-hour show out of it. So I rearranged the music to kind of bring in all of my different influences. So that's how I got into doing the Charlie Brown Christmas. But this year, Rudy's wanted to see about doing Thanksgiving and Halloween special. And so anyone who's a big Charlie Brown fan knows that some of the music is like carried over from both, but there are unique ones. And so the music's a lot of scoring music. It's a lot of walking to do this, walking to do that. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I make this music work? And so we're going to reimagine some of this music for a full concert situation. You'll hear a few different versions of the Linus and Lucy theme because Vince Guaraldi's kind of used this like in a bunch of different versions. There's the Christmas version that's kind of more the one people are really familiar with. But Vince Guaraldi also was on a record deal where he's doing a lot more fusion. And so he's got one that's more of like a James Brown kind of feel to Linus and Lucy. And then he's got one that's a little bit more chill, like a bossa nova. And so we're going to do a few different versions of these. And then I'm going to reimagine some of these like short scores, like 1-minute scores, to be like a full song. So we'll improvise, we'll play the melodies, kind of in the traditional jazz format.
Murphy will wrap up the year with a Charlie Brown Christmas in December. For more information about Alex Murphy Trio presents a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving and other events happening this week, visit WNXP.org. My name is Monkees Munson, and thank you for listening to another edition of What We're Wednesday.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday, so subscribe in your favorite podcasting app to make sure you never miss an episode. And if you like this, you'll probably enjoy the Nashvillager newsletter too. You get perspective from more of my colleagues at Nashville Public Radio and links to the stories we're following. Sign up for those daily emails at WPLN.org/Nashvillager. And thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.